Through 31 games this season, the Lakers have the number 13 ranked offense, scoring about 114 points every 100 possessions. They're actually one of only 2 playoff teams with a negative point differential though, and that's because of how weak they've been on defense. They've allowed just under 116 points every 100 possessions, good for 21st in the NBA, and the worst among any team with at least a 500 record. It became pretty clear to me that in order to be considered a serious playoff threat in that grueling Western Conference, they'd have to find ways to improve their defense without sacrificing offense. And that's exactly why they went out and traded for Dorian Finney-Smith, who fills some of their biggest needs. Let's start with the defense. With a weird roster construction in Brooklyn, Finney-Smith spent a lot of time operating as a sort of small ball big. He's definitely got the body for it, standing 6'7" with a 7-foot wingspan, while also having a decent amount of lower body strength that allows him to match up with bigger, more powerful creators. In LA, however, he likely won't be asked to spend nearly as much time on 4s and 5s, and that's because they've already got one of the league's better defensive anchors in AD, and another big body in LeBron to take those assignments. So what does that mean for his role? Well, if we go back to his Dallas days, he was often their go-to guy at the point of attack. They'd stick him on the primary creator of opposing teams, whether they played the 1, the 2, or the 3, and he'd have to fight through screens using his size and length to smother the ball. The thing is, I actually think screen navigation is one of his few flaws as a defender, and with the shift towards playing more and more like a big over these last couple of years, it's probably gotten a little bit worse. I will say that his ability to defend multiple positions does unlock some versatility here, and with the way the Lakers have used AD as a switch big this season, you get a nice balance there. But for the most part, I don't think Finney-Smith's best role is playing at the point of attack. If he were to join the Lakers a year ago, there's no doubt in my mind that they'd basically force him into that role and hope for the best. One thing has changed over the last month or so though, and that's been the emergence of Max Christie. Christie's now started in 8 straight for the Lakers, and in the month of December played an average of about 29 minutes per game. And what he brings to the table is that more traditional point of attack look, with his lateral quickness, lanky frame, ability to get around screens, and disrupt action with decent hands. I also think Gabe Vincent's been a pretty good option for them on the ball when he's in the game, so that's 2 backcourt players who are more than capable of taking on those assignments. Going back to Finney-Smith, if he isn't best suited defending guards like he was in Dallas, or bigger players like he was in Brooklyn, where's he at his best? Well, it's simple. In LA, I expect him to primarily match up with wings. This is really important because when Vando's hurt, the Lakers don't really have any sort of wing stoppers on their roster. And if we look back at the last few NBA champions, that role has shown to be incredibly important. Boston's got any one of Jason Tatum, Jaylen Brown, or Drew Holiday. Denver's guy was Aaron Gordon. Before that, you had Andrew Wiggins with the Warriors, PJ Tucker with the Bucks. Finney-Smith may not be the best at getting around screens, but he is one of the better isolation defenders in the NBA and has consistently been one for half a decade now. I talked about his big frame and strength. He also moves well laterally, has agile hips that allow him to cut off attack angles, and overall is just technically sound, rarely ever making mistakes or causing breakdowns. The same applies to his off-ball defense. Because I expect him to be matched up with wings more often than on-ball guards, he'll be in more of a position to bring help. He's not much of a defensive playmaker, won't jump a ton of passing lanes, but he will be in the right spots at the right time as a helper, and even offers a little bit of secondary rim protection when needed. And to me, this move is all about defensive versatility. With the swap, it's easy to think of DFS as a replacement for D'Angelo Russell and look at how that impacts the team's defense. However, I'm looking at it more from the standpoint of DFS being a replacement for Rui Hachimura within their starting and closing lineups. Bron and AD have their limitations, primarily when it comes to taking plays off or making second efforts. That's something that will look a lot more tenable with a third frontcourt defender as active as Finney-Smith. Dorian also has his own flaws. As I mentioned earlier, he can sometimes struggle getting through screens. The thing is, AD being one of the best drop defenders in basketball makes it easier to recover, and the fact that both of those guys can switch onto multiple positions should help them mitigate a lot of those advantages. Dorian's also a weak defensive rebounder, but with Bron and AD being two of the best rebounders in the league at their respective positions, this isn't something I necessarily worry about. Those two guys also have their own sets of defensive strengths, primarily size and versatility, which will only be amplified by having a strong wing defender who can pretty much switch onto either position when needed and offer a presence in help coverages. Those three on the floor with a point of attack guy in Christie or Vincent, and now we're looking at some lineups that likely aren't bleeding any defensive value. Do I expect him to come in and completely transform the defense? Of course not. I think the team still needs a serious backup big. Many have said that they could use some more athleticism in the backcourt, and I would like to see them add a defensive playmaker, such as Jared Vanderbilt. But I do think this is a major upgrade to a struggling defense that will be felt from day one. As for the offense, they are losing one of their best shooters and playmakers in D'Angelo Russell. And for a team who, at times, has looked like they lack both shooting and playmaking, that does seem a little bit worrisome. Remember what I said about Finney-Smith not replacing Russell though. I think the first thing this move did was emphasize LA's faith in Austin Reeves as a playmaker. He's shown a ton of growth, most notably in that recent 16 assist performance against the Kings, and I'd expect him to handle more responsibility moving forward. Whatever's left from that gap and initiating load will likely be handed to LeBron, so you have two more than capable initiators, but the collective playmaking across the board is where I'm slightly concerned. I like the way they use AD as a passing hub, which gives them some flexibility. I think Vincent's a good enough ball handler and passer to set up the offense, but in terms of guys who can apply pressure in off-the-catch situations and consistently make the right decisions, I do think this roster is lacking, and that really isn't something Finney-Smith brings to the table. Sure, he was sometimes used as a dribble handoff hub in Brooklyn. He's not a bad passer, but he is very limited with the ball in his hands, and on the Lakers, I expect him to pretty much exclusively spot up and shoot. In these spots, the Lakers absolutely need him to knock down his threes at a consistent clip, which has been pretty up and down over the past few years. In the last 3 seasons, he's made just under 36% of his catch and shoot threes. That's not necessarily bad, but it isn't great, and it's a decent step down from what we saw during his time in Dallas. If we go back to the 3 full years he spent with the Mavs before being traded, he attempted nearly 1,000 catch and shoot threes and made an impressive 39.6% of them. The caliber of shooter LA gets could determine whether or not the trade is a big win, because if he's consistently knocking down close to 40% of his threes, I'm really not that worried about his fit within their offense. He's the type of guy that teams are comfortable putting their rim protectors or helpers on and having them roam into the paint. And because he's very limited off the catch, pretty much the only way he can counter is by making them pay on these catch and shoot opportunities. In the playoffs, teams will start to close out harder and more aggressively in hopes that they can force him into putting the ball down, which means that the looks will become more and more contested. Historically, he's responded well, hitting nearly 42% of his threes throughout his playoff career, but we'll have to wait and see if he can sustain that as the sample size continues to grow. After all, the Lakers desperately need someone who can pressure the defense as a spot-up shooter, as that's arguably their biggest weakness as an offense. This season, they're attempting about 34 threes every 100 possessions, which ranks 28th in the league. Finney-Smith, being a guy who consistently attempts upwards of 5 a game, should allow them to at least maintain that volume with the loss of a higher level shooter in D'Lo. But it's still a flaw that I'd expect them to address moving forward. And the same goes for some of the other issues I've mentioned, like the lack of collective playmaking and a few of their limitations on defense. As things currently stand, I view the Lakers as a dangerous playoff team, but still not a serious threat to really go on a big run and give problems to teams like the Thunder or Mavs. They still have 2 first-round picks they can trade, and some movable contracts like Rui Hachimura, Gabe Vincent, and Jared Vanderbilt, so one has to think that there are still some options on the table. Whether that means Colin Sexton or Walker Kessler, whether that means Robert Williams or Nick Richards, I'm really not sure who's available or who LA has on their radar, but what I do know is that Dorian Finney-Smith is a pretty seamless fit, and will absolutely upgrade some of the team's biggest needs. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to drop a like, subscribe, and turn my post notifications on to be first on more content. If you're interested in my more in-depth research, make sure to check out the Hoop Venue podcast and my social media profiles. You can find those links in the description. Feel free to let me know down in the comments what you think of the trade. As always, I hope you all have a great day, and I'll catch you guys in the next one.